Okay, so we are on the December 14th session of Identity and Access Management. We've already begun recording, so that's cool. We're at the end of our roadmap. We are still in our OAuth deep dive for today and then one more day on Monday. And then we'll do some cleanup topics and then a 2-hour review next Friday, and then we're done. And then hopefully a lot of you will go and schedule your exam if you haven't done so already. Pass that exam and tell us all about your successes. So for today's presenters, we have Jaseem. Madhu might be on a plane, so we might just have to open this one up to group discussion unless somebody has SAML assertion flow information they want to share. And then we've got Paulina and John. So without further ado, Jaseem, I am going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Natalya. Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep, we can.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk about SAML bearer assertion flow for OAuth 2.0. Or this is in general called as bearer flows under OAuth flows. Key highlights for this particular flow, we've been talking about SAML and then OAuth, the difference between SAML and OAuth. This is one flow where both are kind of like married to each other. Here in this OAuth flow, to get the access token, you're using a SAML assertion, which is, we have already seen in the XML based assertion, which is used to get the token. The second thing, the key thing that we need to remember for this particular flow is this flow is used when a client wants to use a previous authorization. So from my understanding, what that means is the client or the external app is already been approved by the user. There is already an authorization, like a refresh token flow. You already have an authorization existing, and then you just want to get token on top of it. That's when you use SAML assertion bearer flow under OAuth. And again, if I misspeak, I'm not an expert in this. If I misspeak, please stop me and correct me, because that'll help me in my understanding as well, and for the group. Another key thing, the authentication in this flow is being provided by a digital signature. So there is a signature applied to the SAML assertion, and that is matched with an X509 certificate that you upload in your connected app in Salesforce. So that trust is being established using a certificate, X509 certificate. So a digital signature plays a key role in this flow. Okay, so and as I discussed, this is similar to a refresh token flow, but the client is not required to have or store a refresh token. So, but there has to be a previous authorization existing so that we can use this flow to get token. Another important detail: client secret is not required. I think in other flows you have to provide this client secret. In this flow, you don't need to provide client secret. And the last but not the least, refresh token is never issued in this flow because you're using a previous authorization. You just use this flow to get a token on top of it. So refresh token is never issued back in this flow. Okay, so let's go to the steps. What all you need to do. We talked about the X509 certificate. So you need to start with creating a connected app in Salesforce and upload this X509 certificate. So this will act as the private key for the app. And then when the SAML assertion comes with that signature, the trust is established, and that's when the token is exchanged. Of course, you need to have a client app that generates SAML assertion and signs with a private key. Token endpoint, as usual, it is /services/auth2/token. So the SAML assertion is being posted to this particular endpoint, and we get the token back. The SAML assertion will also have different parameters like audience, issuer, subject, and validity of the assertion. We'll get to those details in a bit. And if everything is good, if that's if all the validation is successful, Salesforce issues an access token. Again, a refresh token is never issued in this flow. So just want to stress that point.
Real quick on this one, in other people's opinion, I believe the documentation is wrong that Salesforce is giving. That very first item when you load the certificate, I actually think you're loading the public key, and then you sign it on your end with the private key. I don't know if anybody else caught that. It mentions that both on this and the JWT, and I don't think you're loading the private key into Salesforce.
No, you don't load the private key. It's a public certificate that you should load.
Right. I don't think it's going to apply to this test, but it probably will on the integration to understand that difference.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, we talked about it last time. We never give our private key outside, right?
Right.
We keep it to ourselves, and then public key is being uploaded in Salesforce, and then that trust is
And then Salesforce docs have the same thing on the JWT that is the private. I think it's wrong there as well. So.
Okay.
Well, I think when they say app, they're talking about the client app, and the client app really does have the private key.
Yes, the client app does, not the connected app.
Yeah, it's just confusing wording because like the connected app represents the client app, but the connected app is on the side that has the public key. So add wording.
So I'd like to have a kind of a little bit of clarity, because I think in the previous slide you mentioned tokens and tokens everywhere. Which tokens are you referring to here? And could you kind of elaborate that at this stage of the process or flow, you're using a authorization code token that already been there, or are you expecting to get a session token or some kind of special bearer token from an application? Or what is being generated? What are these tokens?
You're talking about this previous authorization that I stressed on?
Yeah, that, and also in the next slide you have you're sending a token and you're getting back a token. Like you're sending a token to endpoint. Obviously, that has to be the authorization code token that you've had previously, I'm assuming, or maybe a refresh token potentially.
Yeah. So I think so that comes to this slide. So for this particular, I have a future slide that talks about it. This particular bearer flow should be used only after the client receives a refresh token from like a web server flow or something like that. So the client needs to have that authorization beforehand for you to use this token. Sorry, to use this bearer flow to get access token. Is there
well, the refresh token would come when you actually authenticate, and your authorization will give you authorization code token in an auth flow, and then the actual refresh token will come when you actually get a session ID. So it actually doesn't need anything else. So you already have that token that will give you access with a refresh token, and that will give you access to both of those things.
Well, my understanding is a little different here. When they say the app, the big point here, and with the JWT bearer flow that we're going to talk about later, is the user has to have previously authorized. And there's an example, I think I put it in the study links, of where you physically go out to a different link, you put in your credentials, and then you're authorized. So I think last session somebody showed your list of like authorized connected apps. So that's all that authorization does, is it says, yes, this user with this app has already authorized access to it. And from there, this flow just creates a SAML assertion and then just sends it with the certificate. So there's no end user interaction at this point anymore. The end user previously said, yes, it's okay for this app to access those resources. And now the user's done. And now we create a SAML assertion with the user information. The trust is established because of the 509 key. And we send that assertion to the token endpoint. The only actual token being passed anywhere here is when the access token, AKA the session ID, comes back.
Well, There is a token endpoint, right? So there's a token being sent. So which token?
No, you're not
Sending
sending. You're not
sending the SAML.
You're not sending a token. You're
Yeah.
sending SAML
Yeah.
assertion to that endpoint.
Yeah, this is the endpoint to get the token.
Okay.
Right, but
So you're actually sending the SAML assertion, and he's probably got it here later on. You tell it what assertion type is that says, I'm not actually sending you an access token. I'm sending you a bearer, or
there's
essentially
something in
the
the request type that tells
Exactly.
you that, hey, I'm not sending you an access code. I'm sending you a SAML assertion.
This confused the heck out of me as well. And yesterday I was trying to prepare for the SAML assertion, trying to fill in, but I ended up doing SAML bearer assertion flow. So I actually have an example working. Maybe I can share what they really mean by authorization, previous authorization,
Okay.
and what endpoints we're reading.
Yeah, that'll help. Even I was not thoroughly convinced, but again, I need to speak today, so.
Yeah, lucky you. Again, only token going around is the access token. Everything else is it's a SAML assertion is going that way and is being traded for the access token.
Yeah. My understanding, I mean, even the documentation says this is similar to a refresh token flow,
Yes.
but the client doesn't have to store the refresh token. So my understanding was, okay, so somewhere it is authorized, the previous authorization exists, and then we keep this particular flow to like, so do we use this when the previous token expired or something?
So I guess this is the kind of key point here. So when you authorize this connected app that was created, and that's done, as I think Natalya mentions, is some other manual step. That's where tokens are being exchanged and you get various things, but you never use those things. You never use refresh token. It just
my experience has been really what they mean by authorization is not authentication. What they mean by authorization is if you have client and the server, you have the connected app on the server. As an admin, you go to the connected app and you authorize. And when you authorize, what are you doing is you're just giving a set of users privilege to connect to this app. That's all it is. That's what authorization is, and a scope to be able to get an access token. That's really what they mean by authorization. The authentication is happening in a single flow where you're actually generating, and of course you have a certificate on the other side. So when the authentication flow happens through the bearer, it's a single flow where you're passing your assertion, which is a certificate, signed certificate, along with the user ID who belongs to that profile that is authorized. So
but the user still has to authorize the access. It's that the user still has to click allow on that little pop-up window.
Well, that's only on the if the connected app is set up that way, because what he's talking about is connected app being pre-authorized by admins, right? So but
that just pre-authorizes what users can use the connected app. The user still has to say this app is allowed to access things on my behalf.
Yeah, so that's another thing. When I was researching, someone pointed out in one of the forum that when you create the connected app and when you select scope for that connected app, you need to select the refresh token scope.
Yeah.
Otherwise, this won't work. So refresh token scope, for my understanding, it is, you can use this or access the data on behalf of the user. That's when you select that refresh token scope.
Yeah, I think that's the reason. The reason they're asking for that is because there's no other scopes that include refresh token in them. You have to add that to a list of scopes that will be exchanged within that authorization.
Okay. Okay. Let's move on. But yeah, good points. So we talked about SAML assertion. So SAML assertion, you need to have these key data points there. You need to have the issuer. Issuer is nothing but the client ID or the consumer key of the connected app. And audience is what you're authorizing against. So if it is a production org or a developer org, it has to be login.salesforce.com. It's a sandbox test.salesforce.com. Recipient is the token endpoint we talked about. That is the endpoint we post the SAML assertion against. Usually SAML assertion will have a subject which has the detail of the particular user you are authorizing for. And then the last key point, SAML assertion must be encoded using base 64 URL encoding.
So this was not clear from the docs. If anybody else understands here on that subject, is the username the only option you have here? Because you're not actually doing SAML, so you can't use like a federation ID, right? You really have to have the person's username.
Yeah, I'm not sure of that, if you can use other.
Yeah, the example that I tried, I used the username. I don't know if you could use others.
Well, yeah, it seems I haven't used this flow, but it sounds to me that the subject is basically, that's the configuration in the connected app when you do the SAML configuration there. If you're doing that in the connected app, then you probably can choose different IDs, not just the username. But if it is baked into the Salesforce, then you probably only subject is the reason. Is this configuration, when you actually configure this assertion flow, do you configure your connected app to do this, or your connected app just serves as a authorization kind of metadata and that's it, that's the end of it?
Yeah, I've not seen you select username in the connected app. Connected app is mainly for the authorization.
Okay, so you only have like OAuth set up in connected app, right? But not SAML.
Yeah.
Okay, then yeah, that's all you can do is username.
Okay. Now, yeah, so this is what we talked about. How will you use SAML bearer assertions? You need to specify the assertion that's coming as SAML bearer using this grant type, which is a required parameter when you set up your request. And you need to have the second one, which is again required, of course, which is assertion, and you pass the SAML bearer encoded base 64 URL encoded SAML bearer assertion as part of this parameter. There are other optional parameters here. You can specify your format. One key thing is you can't specify scope in this flow. So what basically happens is, since we need a previous authorization for this flow to be used, Salesforce looks at all the previous approval, and that include a refresh token. And if it finds, it combines all the scopes. So if you have an ID scope or API scope or a web scope, it combines all the scope, and then see if you have any scope available. If Salesforce doesn't find any approved scopes, this flow fails as unauthorized. And then, yeah, the key point, I think we touched this point, bearer flows, whether it is SAML bearer or JWT bearer token flow, can only be used after the consumer has received a refresh token.
And that refresh token comes from that previous authorization, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And this goes back to configuring the refresh token in when you manage the connected app to decide when does that refresh token expire. So make sure you have an expiration date long enough, or set it to never, if you want this flow to keep working automatically.
That's true. Okay, real quick on the flow, just a recap. So the client or the consumer requests the access token using a post for this particular endpoint, and the assertion should be base 64 URL encoded. Grant type should specify it's a SAML bearer assertion that's coming, and then you need to have the other parameters, the issuer, audience, recipient, etc. And then you apply that SAML assertion to the endpoint, and Salesforce issues that token. You will see the token type is bearer. And then how will you use it? Your header, authorization header is specified as bearer space access token. And then you can use that token to access your resources. just an example on what the response looks like. You'll see the token type is bearer. You'll get the ID URL. You will see here that there is no refresh token in the response. And some of the errors that yesterday I was trying to make it work, but I was not successful. So, for example, your assertion is invalid. You'll see invalid assertion. Sometimes, if it is expired, you will get this message, expired authorization code. I think this is what Natalya just pointed out, I guess. And then sometimes you will see user hasn't approved this consumer. So when you're using it without a previous authorization, you will get this. Also, you will get this if this particular link is the forum discussion that I was talking about. You'll get this error when you create your connected app, and if you're not choosing the refresh token scope for your connected app, you will get this error. I think that's all I have, Talia, for this flow.
Okay. All right. So again, Madhavi said she was traveling this morning. I'm going to share the flow. I'll just share the whole screen. Keep it simple. All right, so this is, and this is confusing because they're named so similarly. So we had the SAML bearer flow, where again, the user previously authorizes the app and then doesn't care. From there, the system just keeps sending the SAML assertion to get its token. This is SAML assertion flow, which is basically just like single sign-on, but it's single sign-on at the API level instead. And a couple of key points here. You can only use that SAML assertion flow within your own org. And another key point, you don't need a connected app. That was probably one of the big takeaways for me, is every other one of these flows requires the connected app, but this one doesn't, because you're basically, it's like a special form of single sign-on, was the way I was thinking about it. So just like in regular SSO, when your user goes to the identity provider endpoint, they provide their credentials, the identity provider sends back the assertion. Same sort of thing. The user goes to the IDP endpoint, they put in their information, you get the assertion, and then it comes through into your org, and now you're accessing API resources instead of accessing your web interface resources. And the documentation on this was kind of sparse. It just basically said that this is for organizations that are using SSO for web access and also want to use that same SSO for API access. So I don't know if anybody's used this, if anybody has more insights on this. That's about all I can tell you about it.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong here. I thought what I was reading, the prior one, you actually are creating a SAML assertion. In this one, you're actually creating the end result of that. You're creating a SAML response and passing that response into Salesforce, which is why you can then use the normal single sign-on, because it's like you went out to the identity provider, they gave you back the response, now you forward that response onto Salesforce.
Well, the response is the assertion, right?
Well, yes and no, because when you're doing SAML, you essentially, your app creates an assertion to go to the IDP. The IDP validates everything and then sends back a response that then gets forwarded over to the app to actually use. So I think the assertion and the response are different sides of what's going on. So.
Okay. So the way I'm understanding this one is the IDP creates this SAML assertion and sends it along. And then on our SAML bearer, I think this is our SAML bearer. Let's see. Yeah, a SAML bearer assertion, the client app itself is actually formulating that SAML bearer response. It's not the IDP that's doing it. Which actually I think is kind of weird, because you're like, well, I'm allowing this app to create this assertion, and it's not necessarily the identity provider. It's just formulating it based on a standard format. And the reason it works is because that certificate establishes the trust that this isn't some random Joe Schmo saying, hey, I have a SAML assertion for this user. You can trust me to do this app. But they don't have that certificate to prove that they are who they say they are. So here it's, it's the client app, which isn't necessarily the identity provider, creates the assertion. Here, we go to the identity provider, get the assertion from the provider, and then forward it, like you said, Jeff, to the endpoint and get our token.
Yeah, they're confusing.
They are.
One of the things that throws me off is which one do we use at what, for what use cases? It's sort of, there are so many options. And
right. Well, this one is basically single sign-on, except instead of using single sign-on to get into Salesforce, you're using that same IDP not to get to Salesforce web browser, but to get to, say, Developer Workbench or something.
Yeah, I think this is a flow that they used most often with situation where they have single sign-on set up, but on top of that single sign-on, without having a special users, like usually when we do integrations and APIs, there's a special API user.
Right.
But in this case, organization wants to utilize this because this is individual going in the web app, logging in and getting their SAML assertion sent, and now they accessing Salesforce resources and authorizing this app to use these Salesforce resources. But they may also want to call APIs to Salesforce internally to do some things and to call some stuff. And this app needs to get these API calls. And so they want to use that same user as the API user as well. That seems like the common pattern here for that usage. Whereas in typical scenarios, you would use something like a bear. If you want to do integration and a high volume, transaction passing through APIs, you would use the bearer token assertion flow, and then you will probably do that will just be just for that purpose. So you can just do transactions between the servers without user being in the middle or being part of that flow. That's right. That seems like the use cases that I would see for this purpose, but it's rarely used.
Yeah, I mean, I see this SAML assertion where the user might have to be logging in every single time, and you need that user there to provide their credentials at the IDP, which then get passed through. Versus SAML bearer, the user allows this app once and says, yes, this app can use my resources. And then the user never has to be present again, as long as that refresh token is still good. From there, it's just the client app says, I'm going to generate an assertion that represents this user. I'm going to send it to the token endpoint, and I'm going to get a token back. And the user doesn't care, doesn't have to be there. Where here on the SAML assertion, the user has to be there. Very confusing. Maybe once we get past the JWT bearer flow, because really JWT bearer and SAML bearer, they're identical basically, except one sends the JWT, the other one sends the SAML assertion. So with that, let's talk about who had the JWT. What the heck is a JWT? Frequently pronounced JOT. I've also heard it pronounced JWAT. So if you hear
Java Web Service token,
JSON Web Token. Thank you. John, I think you have that.
No, it's me, Paulina.
Oh, Paulina, hi.
Hi. Okay, let me share. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna go over the JWT tokens. So I'm gonna go through what is the definition, the structure, some examples, how it's used, and some best practices, okay? So, okay. So what is a JSON Web Token? It's really following a standard. What it really is, in summary, is a secure way to send data over a secure URL. This is the standard formal definition. It's really an open standard. It's compact, self-contained, to send secure information over parties as a JSON object. what is important is the JSON token is digitally signed, and you can sign it using different algorithms, usually HMAC. So I think it's going to be easier when I go through the examples and I show you. But what is important about the JSON tokens is that they are always signed, and that signature is going to help the parties to make sure the data is what they received, the data is what it was sent, so it was not tampered in the way. And also whoever is sent, the person, who's the party who's sending it is really the party that is saying it is. So you'll see it in the next one. I think it's easier. So how is this token, how it looks like? It's 3 parts. It's first part dot another part dot another part, like xxx dot yyy dot zzz. So 3 parts: the header, the payload, and the signature. So the header has 2 things. One that is saying what type of hash algorithm is going to be used in the token. That could be HMAC or RSA. And what type of token we are sending. In this case, it's going to be a JWT token. So it has these 2 parts in the header. In the payload, second part here is where you send the message. Really, they say contain claims. Really is what you're trying to send. What you're trying to send the data, or what action are you trying to request through the token here in the middle. And then you have the signature. And in the signature is where you pass a secret, and you use a hash algorithm there to kind of code the whole thing. So the signature is really the encoded header and payload using a secret. Okay, so I think it's easier when I show you the first example here. So this is on the left side, you see JWT token. You see the 3 parts, 1, 2, 3, separated by these dots. So the first part is the header, and the header really looks like I'm using this algorithm, and the type of token is JWT. The purple part here is the payload that can have here, what is the claim, the data I'm sending here. And the last part, the blue part, is the signature, where really I'm using the hash algorithm here to say, this is my header, this is my payload here, and this is the secret word that I'm using. So when you use this one, it will just encode the whole thing. So it has these 3 parts. Let me show you another example that I found. So this one, again, it has 3 parts: the header in green, then in yellow, the claim, and then in blue, the signature. So in the header here, they are saying I'm using this algorithm, HS255, type of token JWT. Here it has, sorry, too fast. Okay. Here it has the claim. So they're passing here the username and what they are trying to do here. And then it has a signature here. And in the signature, as always, is really what they are doing is hashing here the header and the payload and passing a secret word. So everything is going to end up looking like this. So one thing that I found is in the middle part, in the payload, you can use different claims or different, actions that you can request. And there are some that are registered, there are some that are public, or you can create your private one. I don't think you will need this for the test, but I put here this URL where you'll find what each of these one means. So if you're using like an external app that is connected to Salesforce trying to get some data, then what you will see is in the code, they might be sending the token and they might be sending this type of actions there. So I saw some examples, but I don't think really you will need that there for the test. But just for your information, I put this slide here. The important thing is, it has 3 parts: header, payload, and signature, and it's very secure. So how or when you use these tokens? I think this is what is the important piece. So you can use the WTJ tokens in many ways. The first one is for authorization. So once the user log in, every subsequent request will send a JWT token. So what it will do is this JWT token is going to allow them to access different services or resources or anything that the token, is permitted to. It is used a lot in single sign-on. because usually JWT tokens are very compact comparing to other tokens, so they are easy to move across different domains. Usually they are using the OAuth variant token flow that you will see it later on in the next presentation. But if you think about Salesforce, it's either used to connect, from external applications, but it's very used when you use continuous integration. So continuous integration is when you do latest, better, greater way to do code migration between environments, etc. So when you use continuous integration, Salesforce requires that you use JSON tokens to connect to the organization. Besides authorization, it's used to exchange information, because in the JSON token, you can pass data, okay, using a JSON format. So you can always be sure that the sender is who they say they are, and that the data hasn't been tampered in the travel of the message, because when it arrives, when you send it in the before you send it, you have the token, you hash the token, you secure the token with your secret password, and you pass it. When it arrives in the destination, it is decoded using the secret password as well, so they can see that it's exactly what, so that the signature matches with the header and the payload. So the signature in the destination, they take the signature, they decode it using the secret password, and then they can match the header from the signature and the payload of the signature with the two things that are sending the first two parts of the token. And then they can see that they match, so they can say, okay, it's not tempered, it's what we are intended to receive, then they can process the request. So let me show you this here. So if you're gonna use Apex, there are a couple of classes for, there's a JW class that you need to use to do this. But let me continue giving you some couple of examples here of when you can use, or when these JW tokens are used. Sometimes you might get an email saying, use this click to add this to favorites, or to delete this, or to unsubscribe, or things like that. So usually, if it were not using like a JW token, you will receive something like this, comment, delete, whatever. So it's all open, clear what you see. If you send a token, then you will see something like this. Very difficult to find out what you're trying to do here. But inside it's saying, do this. This is what it's saying. Or to send information, like here, you will be, if you don't use a JSON token, you will be like, for example, a post. To transfer here some information you are sending, it's very clear here, you're sending the account, the amount, etc. Or you can use transfer HTTP1 and put here the JSON token, and then it's really what you're sending is here. So it's much more secure because it's encoded. So how it works. So as I mentioned to you, it is used for authentication and authorization. So this is kind of a flow where the user first it has to sign in, whatever method is using, Facebook, Google, whatever it is. It will go to the authorization server, and the server is going to return back the token, the JW token. It's going to be returned to the user. Then that token will be passed to any application server to request any of the services, make API calls, whatever is needed there. So in this case, here in the bottom part is used for authorization. So it's sending the token, and usually when you send it for authorization, they use like the better token. So the header usually have something like authorization column better, and in front of it the token. But it's sent here the token, then the application server is gonna decode the token and make sure it is who he is, and the data is not tempered, and then it's gonna process the API call. So in this case, you're seeing the authentication and the authorization. If you focus only on authorization, what happens is here, the client is sending the request to the server with the token, and to the authorization server, sorry, and the authorization server returns a token, the JWT token, and then that is used to connect to the server and get the API resources. Usually it's used for RESTful services. So I wanted to put it here because what happened is most of the cases I have read about these tokens, they are used for integration for RESTful services, because really what happened is you don't need to save the password in the database. It has to be stateless. So what happened is all the information come in your token, and the token can be used, as long as it doesn't expire, and it can be stored in the browser. So usually, if you are doing integration, RESTful integration, they are going to ask you probably about that. You use JWT tokens. That's kind of the main use of these tokens. I found this kind of comparison between JWT tokens, Simple Web tokens, and SAML tokens, and I kind of thought, maybe it's important for you to see it. I don't know if we will get any questions around this, but in summary, you can read this. I'm not going to read it, but in summary, what I got out of here reading about these tokens is the JSON tokens are much more simple than all the other tokens, are very compact, and it's very easy to use as a security key, because you can use that secret word. So usually are very, very simple, are more common use across multiple applications. So and they are really the ones that are used at internet scale. So you can, escalate with this token as much as needed, So it looks like that's the main difference comparing all of these. So I think if we get any questions about when to use one or the other one, I think you need to think about simplicity, security, and if it is used for APIs, integrations across URLs, maybe you are going to be using these JWT tokens. Okay, best practices that I found. So you need to keep it secret, because if the secret word is passed or somebody found it, then of course they are going to find out what is the payload, what is everything. They can decode the security token, and so keep it safe. So it's recommended that you send always the JWT tokens through HTTPS, of course, to be secure, so it cannot be intercepted. You can also encrypt the whole token. You can use encryption around that. However, it might impact the performance of the integration. So you need to be wise when or not to use it. So another thing that I found is, I don't know what will be this case, but you might find a case where you need to have a secondary token for security. So depending on what you're sending, maybe in a healthcare environment where you send patient information or something like that, you need to have extra security. So you have to take a look at what you are sending and what type of information and how secure or how regulated is that information. Don't send sensitive data in the payload. And it's always recommended to give tokens an expiration. Why? JWT tokens, you cannot do like a logout. That's what I was reading there. So it's not like you can say, okay, use the token now, I'm log out, not use it anymore. No, the token will still be alive and working. The token will be active as long as it's not expired. So you need to give the tokens like a, expiration date. If it expires, then you get a refresh token. And in these slides that I forgot to put it there, but you will read them in the bottom, you will see some of the instructions on how to get a refresh token if you need it. But it's very important to do that, to make sure you have an expiration. And these are the sources that I got. The Salesforce. I hope this helped. That's it, Natalie.
All right, thanks. Paulina, can you go back to the slide where you had the chart that had like the issuer, the audience, and the subject in it? No, keep going back. It was a table. Sorry, it wasn't a chart. It was a table.
Where you have the 3 parts?
Yeah, you just passed it.
No, I have 2. One is this
right
one.
There. This one. That no, not that one. Sorry, it looked like this, but
the other one where I have the explanation of the type of payload that you can have.
Yes.
So here it is.
Yes, right there. Okay, so the thing to note here is
before you ask. So this URL here is gonna open this page here that I have, where it has for every single type of claim what it is and how to use it. Okay, so sorry for interrupting you. Let me go back here to the slide that you wanted to see, this one. Okay.
Yeah, so can you make that big again?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, the main point to note here, if you look at those first 3 lines, it's the same information that you send through in a SAML assertion. It's going to look a little different, like SAML doesn't abbreviate ISS, it'll say issuer, it'll say subject, it'll say audience. But the big takeaway for me when I was studying this is JWT and SAML are sending the same kind of information, just SAML's using XML, JWT is using JSON to send it. And they're both going to send an issuer, a subject, and an audience. I don't remember if SAML is going to send the expiration time or not. So if you remember nothing else, remember that. Thanks, Paulina.
Okay.
And you're up.
Let me stop presenting.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. So, Paulina did a fabulous job because that made mine very easy to do. What I'm going to show, as soon as I actually start presenting, that might be helpful too. Let me go present a window, and that is not what I wanted. I want present my entire screen, and we would like to present this screen. Cool. All right, everybody should be seeing 2 web browsers. Is that correct? And now they should be seeing a web browser on the left and VS Code on the right. So, yeah, awesome. Okay, so my was just simply how to demonstrate a JWT flow. At least that's what my understanding was. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Natalya. The beauty is I get it very easy this week because this is actually part of an existing trailhead. So as Paulina mentioned, one of the main uses around JWT tokens is to provide a authorization flow for things like continuous integration. If you're getting into the waters of DX, Salesforce DX, you're going to hear about the fact that it's all about a total new way of doing the experience and the development, utilizing source control right from the beginning. So every change that we make in the org is not just made in a sandbox and we push it up, but we actually pull it out and we check it into source control. And so one of the key issues going on there is, everybody, you might have a bunch of different developers checking in source control to a simple source control repository, the Git and GitHub or whatnot. And the question becomes, how do you ensure that the application continues to build? And so you could have a poor schmuck off to the side who is relegated to the task of manually doing this kind of build every single time somebody does a commit and verifying it, or you can use automated continuous integration. So if you go into Trailhead and you look for a module called continuous integration using Salesforce DX, it will walk you through the steps of setting up a basic rudimentary type continuous integration process. Now, the key here and why this is relevant is, again, you can either have a poor schmuck who is sitting at chained to his desk and he has to manually check out everything and manually do all the steps, or you can automate it. But then the question is, how do you authenticate to your what is called the Dev Hub, or the central development org, Salesforce org, for all of your Salesforce development operations? So And when you do anything with a Salesforce DX CLI, you have to authenticate first to that central dev hub. Most of the time, it's everybody's production org. There are a few times when it's not. But the question is, how do you do it, and how do you get something like a cloud service to do it, and you don't have to be there all the time to manually key in your credentials? So again, this Trailhead module walks you through a lot of the basic setups. It actually comes in 3 parts. The part that is relevant to this talk is the second one: create your own connected app and get it set up and run through that. If you need to, or if you understand what's going on here, it's setting up, if you don't have a GitHub account, and it's setting up Travis CI. Travis CI, or Travis Continuous Integration, is basically a free cloud service that will do automated builds. And so basically this sets up all your accounts here for GitHub and Travis CI, and they refer you to a demo. Salesforce refers you to a demo GitHub repository that you can use for an example here. But anyway, the steps are very straightforward. So in the create your connected apps section, it basically talks about a couple of different things. First of all, it gets you set up on OpenSSL, which is a common tool to encrypt keys and server keys. And so I'm going to bypass that because I've already gotten all that. Basic process is you got to just create your own self-signed SSL certificate. Off on the left, I have the sample project that they have checked out. And so I'm in this directory right here. So what I will do a little bit is they make it very easy because they make click and copy. And so basically you just work through the commands one at a time. The first one is to generate an RSE private key. And it just goes through all this little jazz. And that does that. So what you've got left is now a server.pass.key. The next thing is to create the key file from this. And so you just use this command on the OpenSSL, and it creates that server key right there. And let's see, then we get rid of the server pass key and just get that done. And now we request and generate a certificate. So this is OpenSSL, and we just basically request and generate a new certificate based on our server key. So copy that. And it's going to just prompt you for whatever the basic credentials are that you need to have. And so country, US, and state, VA, and locality, doesn't really matter. Organization, IAM study group, whatever works for you. Common name and email address. And the key thing here is that you make sure that you don't put a challenge password. When you enter it, just hit enter. When they ask for a challenge password, you just hit enter. And what that goes off and does is creates the server certificate right here. Let's see. And then we generate the SSL certificate here. Again, it's very straightforward. These steps are universal, at least for creating a self-signed certificate. And once you're done, you've got you've got these 3 keys, or these 3 files: the cert, the certificate, and the key file. And so then it gets over to creating a connected app. So creating a connected app, again, you just open up the org that you're in. In this case, for this example, you're opening your production development org. And it's basically just like we were doing for all the other connected apps. It would be, in this case, it's Salesforce CI, Travis CI. I'm putting a 2 on it because I already got one in there. And put your email address in there. And the key things about the JWT is you have to open up the OAuth flows, and let's see, the callback flow. The callback will be this URL in this case, at least. There might be other callback URLs depending on what kind of environment you're in. And you've got to use the digital signatures. And this is where you had created your certificate file. Oh, I'm sorry, the cert file. Here we go. And so this is what the connected app will use to make it happen. And then you have to grant it a couple of scopes, the API, and it was refresh token. And then finally, this last one at the bottom. So we add those over. Don't lose this page. Thank you. And oh boy. Pardon me real quick. And there we go. All right, so, and you basically just leave all the rest as defaults, I believe. That's what I remember doing. Yeah, the only one that you really had to check was use digital signatures and load up the cert. And once you have that, you have pretty much that set up. And then you wait the prescribed 2 to 10 minutes for the app to cook a little bit and get ready to go. And while you're waiting, you have to get in there and manage some policies. So this part of it is important because you have to allow the permitted users, specifically the admin users, to approve without, or they're pre-authorized. And so this step, as I understand it, this step is critical to allow a non-password authentication type flow, which the JWT is trying to do. And that, I think, was the only thing that you needed to do on the edit policies. And then finally, you have to give a permission set or set a permission set. I've already taken the liberty of setting out that permission set. And basically, you add the users who have access to this connected app. So you add the admin users to this. So basically, you would just create a, whatever, a standard user that would have access to the dev hub or be able to interact with the dev hub on behalf of Chavez or some automated CI solution, and go from there. So we created the permission set, and now it's a question of testing the auth flow. So if we go testing the auth flow, testing the auth flow is pretty straightforward. You will allow me a little bit of trickery at the moment. I'm going to switch back to the connected app that I've set up earlier, because otherwise, if I had to wait for this one that I just created, it would take too long. But basically, at least for the, so I'm using the Salesforce DX command line utility, and that's the utility that's what I'm, but you could do this with any kind of automated or programmatic client. I mean, there's examples in the documentation about using Java. I was looking for an example and I found one, but I didn't have time to perfect it. And that's using the Postman API client. There's a way to do that, this entire flow from there and emulate that. In this case, they just need the Salesforce DX tool needs to authenticate to the org, and that's what all this operation really is doing. And so it's force auth. And so there are a couple of different ways for this to work. So the DX client has the basic way to go force auth web login, which would be the standard username and password flow. But then it also has this ability to do the JWT grant. And so JWT grant, and we just look at the, so what we're looking at here is just the basic command structure for this. It has a couple of different flags. The client ID is going to be your consumer key. The instance URL, in case you have a domain name going on that way. And you would have the JWT key file. And so this would be required as well. And I think that's pretty much all. Well, no, you would have to specify the hub username as well. Yeah, the hub username, because those three are required. Anyway, so the command looks similar to this type of thing. So grant, the -u is the username you're working with. The F flag is the JWT key file, and then the OAuth client ID, which is the consumer key. And so I have a basic working example right here. Again, I've gone through this step of exporting into my environment variables the consumer key, JWT key file. And that, so let me just, let's see, echo specifically key file. So my key file is this server key that I generated earlier in my certificates directory. And so if I basically just take this command, plop it in there and execute, it basically says it will authenticate. And so what happens is, in this example, the continuous integration jobs basically authenticate real quick to the Dev Hub. And once that's done, then they can go and create their scratch orgs and build the project, and off to the races you go, and it's finished. So anyway, that's all I've got to show.
So SFDX is taking care of, when you specify all those command line arguments, it's taking those and it's creating that job file. Right.
Job. And you know what? I did not look, but there might be. They just publicly released the source code for SFDX. I mean, literally last week. And I might be able to find an example of what's happening. But, you know, but that would take me more than a minute. But yeah, I mean, basically, it's doing basically a post web a REST call to the I think it's the authorization endpoint. The standard authorization endpoint, but it's using, instead of, it's just sending over that JWT token that's encrypted that Paulina was showing.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Questions, comments from anybody here?
Yeah, that was pretty nice. And just wanted to add that when we earlier talked about the SAML bearer assertion flow, in fact, the connected app experience is the same thing. You do the exact same thing in terms of previously authorizing, using your admin. You would set up the permission set of the profile for the users that would have access. You would upload the certificate key. You would go through the same steps to generate the key, the public key. And on the client side, the only difference is here SFDX is using JWT, but your client would use XML and SAML assertion standard to generate a assertion, and the response would be an access token. That's what my understanding was. I had an example, but I don't think we have time to look through that.
Yeah, that was my understanding as well, that the JWT bearer, the SAML bearer, they're identical, except one sends a SAML, one sends basically XML formatted SAML assertion, the other sends the JSON web token as the assertion. Okay, then I will, thank you, John. I'm going to present the schedule for next Friday. Okay, I guess I'll share my entire screen. And so we got the weekend coming up, so light reading. We'll talk about the OAuth 2.0 username password flow. I've got this OAuth 1 authentication flow on here. I'm going to call this one optional because I don't think Salesforce uses it anymore. So consider that just more informative reading and don't spend too much time on it. And then for Monday, we have the last of our OAuth flows. So we've got Brenda, Pavitra, and Jeff up. And that'll be the end of OAuth. Wednesday, we're going to pick up kind of miscellaneous pieces that we haven't covered yet. And then Friday's the big review session. Again, please plan on staying for 2 hours on Friday. Hopefully your schedule will allow that. And just to let you know, the format for Friday is going to be, we're going to take all those study objectives from the study guide and we're going to go through them, and we're going to kind of do a round robin approach where everybody will give us a little tidbit of information about whatever study objective we're talking about. I'll have more details on that next week as well. But again, we are done for today. As always, I'll hang out till the last person leaves, and we will talk to everybody on Monday. So I'm going to stop recording now, and we're done. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Yep, you do the same. Thank you.
Thank you.